Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Do we have everyone? All right. So my name is Lior Konforty. I'm the founder and CEO of Scenario, which is a new project that is going to utilize the technologies we're going to talk about today in a massive manner, I would say. And these Bitcoin 2.0 technologies, they are one of the most interesting developments in the Bitcoin world currently. I'm sure you've all heard about the blockchain, the technology underlying Bitcoin. And what we're starting to do with it right now is to generalize this solution to give us the opportunity to utilize it for information transfer, so something beyond just currency. And we're starting to come up with very interesting solutions to problems which have been really plaguing us, the entire Western civilization, I would say, for many years now. And we have the tools to really break it down to very manageable portions of solutions. So I'll let you guys introduce yourselves, and we'll start the discussions.
Good morning, everyone. David Johnston here again. I guess I'm wearing my Decentralized applications hat for this panel. I can also speak about the Mastercoin platform as I serve as the chairman of the board of directors for the Mastercoin Foundation.
Hi, Gideon Greenspan, founder and CEO of Coin Sciences. We're developing a protocol on top of Bitcoin to use the metadata to do all sorts of other things. We just released a smart contracts protocol, and the next thing we're doing is integrating messaging, rich messaging with the Bitcoin protocol.
Vitalik, Buterin, founder of the Ethereum project.
Alex Mizrahi. I implemented the first color at Coin's wallet and the first protocol.
Lior Yaffe. I'm an NXT core developer. NXT is an altcoin protocol.
All right, so the first thing I want each of you to talk about is what's the distinctive aspect of your solutions. Oh, I'm sorry, you didn't get a chance to introduce yourselves. You just came in. All right. So.
Yeah, my name is Stas. Oskin. I'm one of the developers and adopters and enthusiasts of Konforty, XCP, and basically the official representative in Israel, more or less.
So again, what I want you to talk about is really what separates your product, your new technology from the rest. So who wants to go first?
Okay, as the late arrival. Okay, as the late arrival, I will begin. So the main point which separates Konforty from the other protocols is basically the adoption and the maturity. The Konforty has launched recently several big profile APOs. You probably know like Storage, Swarm, several more in pipelines, and was selected by Overstock as the official platform for their upcoming Medici platform, which will be basically a regulated and SEC-compatible platform for doing second market activities for Main Street companies like Wall Street companies and stuff. So I would say that the main advantage of Konforty is actually being used worldwide, actually being supported worldwide, and it's being a totally grassroots effort, which is not being controlled or being centralized by any kind of party. It's a really wide adoption project.
I guess I'll speak in the context of the master protocol. I think probably what distinguishes the master protocol is it's probably got the largest core developer team of the projects working on top of the Bitcoin blockchain to provide assets and smart contracts. There's 12 full-time developers, about half of those working on the web wallets and about half of those working on the core client. And the team, I've seen just an incredible level of professionalism when it comes to testing and really treating this as financial software. So others will, sort of put out experimental things, and if the protocol breaks, the protocol breaks. They've been a lot more careful to spend time and really flesh out the functionality of crowd sale mechanisms, token issuance mechanisms, decentralized exchange. And so that's probably, I think, what really separates them is a focus on sort of quality and testing. And I think that's ultimately what you want if you're going to do fairly large amounts of value transfer. So already the master protocol has more than $10 million of value being stored on top of it. and that's growing pretty quickly.
So I think what is unique about our protocol is that it's designed to scale very, very large, and at the same time, we enable a completely decentralized approach where basically each issuer has a relationship directly with the people holding their tokens, and we're designed around a lightweight wallet, so your users can have a lightweight wallet on their own computer and they're not dependent on any centralized website. And so we've designed it in such a way, essentially, so that if our company disappears, the whole thing will continue working and you won't be dependent on us in any way.
The main feature of the Ethereum project is basically that the way we've designed ourselves is that Ethereum has no features. All we have is this fully generalized programming language. We do not try to support anything. It's a programming language similar to Python or Lisp, and you can pretty much write whatever decentralized app you want.
Colored coins, the characteristic feature is that it works directly on the Bitcoin protocol and is very similar to Bitcoin itself. It also has outputs like Bitcoin outputs, and so it is tightly integrated with Bitcoin, and you can have advanced features built on top of it in the same way they are built on top of the Bitcoin. So we can benefit from these features.
What's unique about Next, there are several things. One is that it's not based on the Bitcoin code, and it's a separate blockchain. The code is developed in Java, unlike Bitcoin's C++. The altcoin is based on proof of share, unlike the proof of work of Bitcoin. What's good about it is that it's much simpler than Bitcoin. Things can be developed quite fast, and in fact there is already an operational asset exchange operating since May, and there is a digital goods store already operating on the Next protocol, and there are quite a few features now in the pipeline, very dedicated development team.
Okay, so what we have here in the panel are representatives from three technologies which are already, I would say, quite functional, which are Counterparty, XCP, Next, and Mastercoin. So I would like to ask the rest of the guys from Colored Coins, CoinSpark, and well, of course, Ethereum. Do you think you can really catch up with the existing technologies? Do you think you have some edge that would maybe get the early adopters using the existing technologies to move over to your solutions?
Well, from our point of view, we're not even concerned so much with getting existing users over as we're basically the fact that you have this arbitrary programming language, you can do whatever you want. I think it opens up a lot of new markets that don't even exist yet. So it's I think it's a matter of once we get the protocols stabilized to a point where people can develop applications on it. It's all a matter of what people are going to do.
Yeah, in the same way, I think there are many different kinds of applications can be built on top of Bitcoin 2.0 technology. So different protocols can occupy different niches. So I think there are unique features which are in all protocols. So I think eventually there is a room for several of them, or there is no need to catch up and fight for the same issues.
So we released 2 weeks ago, and we already have one issue, and I think there's probably been about 20 serious issues done over all these protocols. So I think really it's wide open, and there's probably millions of possible tokens that could be issued in the world. One thing I want to say in general is that there are different properties of these different protocols which make them more or less suitable for certain things. For example, Mastercoin and Counterparty allow a decentralized exchange to be done over the blockchain. That has some serious advantages over color coins type protocols, which ours is also one of, and it also has some disadvantages. And so different applications will be attracted to different protocols in terms of what's suitable for them. So I really think it's wide open at this point.
Yeah, if I can just echo that, I think the basic question is flawed in the sense that I don't think of these as competing companies. They're open source projects for the most part, right? I almost like to use the analogy more of these are programming languages, and yeah, I guess Python competes with Java, competes with C++, but really all of these languages have specialized over time. And I'll use a lower level language like C++ to build the back end of a high frequency trading engine, and I'll use JavaScript to build a web interface. And I think we'll see something similar with these protocols over time, where they'll adopt best practices from each other, they'll learn from each other, and it's a very fluid situation because they're all open source.
One of the most major advantages that Mastercoin, Counterparty, and other blockchain-based solution have is basically the maturity of the Bitcoin blockchain itself. As one coming from the mining industry, I can attest that we basically all have built the biggest supercomputer the worldwide ever known. So we kind of get the blockchain security out of box. And I pretty much assume that this will be one of the biggest hurdles the non-Bitcoin blockchain project will need to overcome before they will reach their mass adoption. That's my thought. I presume Mastercoin guys as well.
Yes, there are lots of advantages to building on top of the world's largest, most powerful decentralized network. Though I do want to say there are things where Bitcoin isn't the best platform. And so if you're doing something like proof of distributed computation, Bitcoin isn't built for that. If you want to do proof of storage, Bitcoin isn't built for that. But if you need a decentralized ledger and a mechanism for transfer of value, Bitcoin's really good at that. So when people ask me, well, should I do it on top of Bitcoin? Should I do it on top of another blockchain? I said, it all depends on what you're doing. If you have a real technical reason to use another consensus mechanism, use another consensus mechanism. But if you're simply issuing a token, the Bitcoin blockchain may be a good fit for you. It really depends on your application.
So this leads me to the question that I want to direct at Lior from Next. Do you think that the innovation that Next brings to the table really warrants going out of the blockchain, of the Bitcoin blockchain? I mean, you probably know that most of the people here in the crypto community in general are quite zealous about Bitcoin and the Bitcoin blockchain, and they have a hard time even entertaining the notion that we're generating a completely new blockchain and using it. So what do you have to say about that? Do you think that Next really has anything to offer that the Bitcoin blockchain does not?
Well, let's start. I think that we need to view Next as an experiment. It's something that can also benefit the Bitcoin community. Because it's new and because it's relatively simple, it allows you to move relatively faster and introduce features that are much more complex to introduce into the Bitcoin blockchain. I think there is definitely place for multiple blockchain technologies. I think this business is very new, and time will tell what will be the best approach. Anything you would like to add?
Well, as a user of Next, I could say that from my perspective, it actually has the most developed market, an asset market, where assets can be decentralized in exchange and traded in a decentralized manner. And so in this sense, I think the Next experiment is quite successful. I mean, it has managed to accomplish some of the things that perhaps are a bit harder to do on the blockchain, where you have to find more esoteric solutions. I would like to ask you to expand a bit on what you think are the major developments that you can go and produce further when you are unconstrained by the blockchain.
First of all, Next does not have the complex mechanism of the UTXO, of the unspent transactions. Next just has accounts, and each transaction has one input. Peer always holds the accounts of all the network, basically. This makes things much more intuitive to do, because it's much similar to financial systems, to the traditional financial systems, in the way it looks outside. You can see, for example, the asset exchange is almost like an exchange, but it's completely decentralized, and it all works on the blockchain. In the next couple of months, we are going to introduce a monetary system so that you can actually issue your own currency on the next blockchain. You can even mine this currency, we call it mint this currency. You can use it for crowdfunding. So this is something that is coming up, and I see a lot of potential for this. For people that just want to issue another altcoin for their own purposes, they can do it without programming and with relatively very, very cheap investment.
I would like to direct a similar question to Vitalik. Do you think you could perhaps even convince us using the Ethereum blockchain and maybe completely leave the Bitcoin blockchain behind?
Okay, so arguments in favor of an independent blockchain. Number one, faster block times. I believe NXT has got 60 seconds. We're planning on 12. BitShares has 10. Number two, big elephant in the room, proof of stake. So Bitcoin currently, just to put it out there, relies on the security assumption that a 19-year-old in Hangzhou and some guy who maybe is in the UK, maybe not, who knows where Ghash is run from, have not yet decided to collude with each other. And so that's what you get when you have ASIC centralization. On the other hand, we've been doing our experiments in ASIC-resistant proof of work, but over time, I think proof of stake based approaches to consensus do actually have first of all, they're a lot more efficient, and they even have the potential to be more secure in certain respects. So it's still highly experimental, but I think as a consensus technology, it has a lot of potential.
So right now, Ethereum is completely foregoing using any proof of work concept?
Well, right now we're going with what we're trying to make as an ASIC-resistant proof of work model, but that's basically temporary because proof of stake is hard, and we do not want to try out five different fundamentally innovative things at the same time. That's generally a good way to have one of them fail and take down the other four nice ideas with it. So we're going to do some of the more complicated things like proof of stake in a future upgrade.
So do you want to say perhaps a few more words about the distinctiveness of the Ethereum blockchain, how it compares to the blockchain, to the Bitcoin blockchain, maybe what you've learned from the mistakes of the Bitcoin blockchain?
Sure. So first of all, just like NXT, we have accounts instead of UTXOs, but we also have a full Patricia Merkle tree in every block, so nodes can pretty much forget the history as soon as they get it. But the most important property is this idea of a Turing-complete contract programming language. So the state is split up into accounts. Each account has its own little mini database inside it, and each account has programming code. And the idea is that these accounts, you can think of them as sort of being like autonomous agents on the blockchain that have programs and that control money, and they can have relationships with each other in pretty much arbitrary ways. So the idea is that these contracts can be anything. So like you could have a contract which represents a currency, and it has an API, in order to act like a currency. And you could have another contract which is a decentralized exchange, and that decentralized exchange contract could plug into any currency contract that anyone ever comes up with that follows a particular standard. You can make contracts for financial derivatives that work on top of those, and so forth.
Well, I just want to get the context. What I want the rest of you guys to talk about is whether or not you think that the Bitcoin blockchain can implement all of those features that the guys from Next and Ethereum have mentioned, or if it's something that you think you should perhaps give up on in advance until we fork Bitcoin to improve it.
So I think it's unlikely that Bitcoin will support these features. And my assumption about the future is that if this whole ecosystem manages to grow, there'll be simple transactions that take place on the Bitcoin blockchain because they'll probably be cheaper to do there because it's a simpler system. And more complex transactions and contracts will take place on other systems like Next and Ethereum, which aren't possible on Bitcoin, but will probably be more expensive because these are more complex systems and have to support more kind of computation in order to enable their features.
So I think that there are major projects that are going to solve three of the core issues that we're really talking about here, and maybe there's four if I add decentralization to the mix. So the big bottlenecks for the entire ecosystem, no matter the blockchain technology, It's decentralization, it's cost, it's speed of block time, and it's really that ability, with these systems to not bloat them to the point, which I guess is related to the decentralization, to the point where they become unmanageable for the average person. So there are major projects working on this. I talked a little bit earlier about Paul Snow's Factum project to solve the bloat problem by taking lots of transactions off-chain, compressing them into one hash, and placing a single transaction into the Bitcoin blockchain. And you're essentially using the mechanism of the blockchain simply for time stamping and for proof of existence. So you can then think about this from a technical perspective. You can look at that hash and you can confirm that this block had to have existed in this form for this hash to have been in the blockchain. And you can take it one step back from there and say, well, this particular hash in that block had to equal this document. Therefore, I can take an infinite amount of information and now secure it in the blockchain with a single transaction. So Paul and his team recently did a cool proof of concept where they took every Mastercoin transaction ever, compressed it into one hash, and added it to the blockchain, which has now permanently time-stamped every one of those transactions and essentially extended the security model of the Bitcoin blockchain. Now, what I would point out is these kind of approaches aren't Bitcoin-specific. So it's blockchain agnostic. You could use something like this for Ethereum or Next or any of the other technologies. Again, and this is just an open source protocol, right? So I think what's going to happen is, yes, Bitcoin will inherit different protocols like Factum to solve some of these core problems, but so will all of the other chains. So again, I think we'll end up in a situation where the protocols will specialize based on what their big focus is and what their core developers are trying to create for value.
We believe, the counterparty believes that basically Bitcoin will remain doing its core function, which it does well. It's basically being a payment network and a platform and basis for other applications which will use its metadata for additional functionality. We do not see the status quo changing in the coming years because every change is too much drastically reflects both on the technological and the political items within the Bitcoin and all the ecosystem. So we believe that all the innovations which will be done on top of the blockchain, Mastercoin, Konforty, other protocols which will arrive, will be have to done within top players done on top of this network. We do believe that there was quite a lot of noise about people saying these protocols are not adding anything, just bloating the blockchain and stuff. But we do believe that we see this noise coming down. I mean, we see less and less proponents. People understand that this addition actually bring more value to Bitcoin rather than derive from it. And we do believe that there will be a peaceful coexistence in the coming time once both the technology will be optimized, as David correctly said here about being able to compress this extra transaction to one, and once the most active proponents, we will not name them, will become assured it's actually something which is beneficial to the ecosystem, not detrimental.
Okay, so I'd like to move to a slightly different subject. And, on the eve of the news of what seems to be the most mainstream adoption of these technologies, the Overstock deal with the counterparty, the rumors starting to fly about some of the heaviest regulatory entities in the US, the SEC and FinCEN, starting to look in a negative way about these technologies and the ability to issue assets which are financial in nature, stocks, bonds, and any assets which has any sort of financial commitment. Unlike Bitcoin, which is not in any way illegal, those have to be regulated, and any sort of issuance which is not regulated is basically incredibly illegal. So I would like to ask you guys what you're doing to cover yourselves and to really give service to people who rely on your technologies to issue assets. What do you plan to do to deal with these regulations to really stay on the legal side of business?
I think the best thing that we can do is develop best practices. So I wrote a white paper, Crowd Sale Best Practices, And I would invite everybody here to offer me pull requests. I've open sourced, it's uploaded on GitHub. So the idea is, and I think really Ethereum is sort of the gold standard that we've seen so far as compliance in being very explicit in managing expectations of customers that are buying the software and that are participating in the crowd sale, and explaining how the token works and the fact that it simply accesses this software platform is really important. The regulatory agencies, most of what they're trying to do is prevent customer harm. And so the best way to do that is to be very above board, be very explicit about what people are getting for their token and what they're purchasing. I thought the terms of service and the other things that Ethereum did were excellent as a way of sort of making that extremely explicit. And so I pulled a lot of that content into my white paper in the appendix. And so if other people have other documents they've written up, please feel free to add them. But I think those are really the things we need to do is, come up with those best practices as an industry, that these are the things we need to explain to people and be very straightforward about how these crowd sales work. I'm mostly coming from that perspective. I'll let somebody else sort of speak to the securities or other aspects. But in my mind, that's really the radical thing, is now you can build a protocol that is monetized with a token directly, and you can sell access that does nothing but access that protocol. So just like Bitcoin, right? I mean, if I buy Bitcoin, the only thing I can do with Bitcoin is send it across the Bitcoin network. It does nothing else. There's no dividends, there's no revenue share, there's no promise of, equity or something like that. It's purely a token that literally just accesses that accounting and ledger system. So I don't know if you want to speak to securities at all.
Since the rumors started flying, it's indeed something that we also aware, and especially in the last few weeks. We treat basically those platforms as a tool. I mean, you can do good and you can do bad with them. It's like with anything. We believe that this is a low-level system which allows you to do anything. You don't need to run immediately and start an IPO and start promising gold and stuff, which basically exactly the regulators are protecting against. And we already see some of our projects doing controversial, like for example, adding system to prevent US-based participants from entering. For example, WEND, as you know, this recently introduced this functionality. WEND is a counterparty-based protocol. I can tell you that from the making things more regularly compliant, and Overstock actually has a full dedicated team of first caliber class of lawyers and people who basically legal people who are experienced in pushing it forward, and Overstock very seriously treats these matters of making it fully compilatory. They have a predefined timeline, and they have quite they have an approach which will hope they will help them reach this. And we are working very hard to make this to solve all this inconsistencies and all these understandings in a very short time frame, to indeed make it safe for everyone, including the Main Street, to use those platforms as an additional tool in their financial tools toolbox array.
Wanted to say, when you issue an asset on the next protocol, it costs you like $25. You can't expect someone to ask for to hire legal services when they issue something so lightweight. On the other hand, some of the things that people are doing there are obviously break any given number of laws. So I think at the end, things will have to come up from both ways. First, the community will have to develop best practices on how do you issue asset legally, what are you allowed to say, what not. But on the other hand, the regulatory bodies will have to adapt as well to some extent.
So there is a cultural problem here because, at least initially, the whole world of Bitcoin very much attracted people that were against regulation and governments, and now we're issuing assets which are backed by specific entities, and this is something that requires regulation. But I think we should recognize that regulation is required because if you look at the history of new financial toys like the stock market, very early on, a lot of people are drawn into investing through this new medium without any connection to the thing they're actually investing in, and lots of people, when the stock markets were created, lost a lot of money, and I'm sure the same thing is going to happen with these cryptocurrency-based marketplaces. What we've done is we developed a contract template which underlines any asset that's issued over our protocol, which actually ties down with legalese and with all the technical information exactly what ownership of the asset means and what you'll get in exchange for that asset. And we tie the ownership of a Bitcoin private key to some underlying legal asset. And what we do to protect our users is, first of all, we hash that contract into the transaction that creates the asset. So in the blockchain, there is evidence of what exactly that contract is, so the issuer can't go and change that contract after the fact, because any holder can prove what the contract was. And second of all, in order to make an asset valid, it needs to sit on the website of the issuer. So if the issuer's website holds the contract, then the asset can be used. If the issuer's website stops holding the contract or changes the contract, the asset can't be used. So we're basically tying the ownership of a website, which is something that's usually quite easy to establish legally, to the legal promises made that underlie the asset. So I think that's the best we can do at the moment. I think specifically in terms of equities, every lawyer I've spoken to, and I've now spoken to a lot of lawyers, have said that if a company wants to issue equity over the blockchain using any protocol, they are doing an IPO. Even if they're not doing it through the NASDAQ or they're not doing it through AIM, they're essentially doing an IPO, and they need to jump through all the regulatory hoops in terms of filing an S1 with the SEC, etc., that they'd have to do with any other type of IPO. So that's about $500,000 if you want to issue equity over the blockchain and you want to do it legally in a Western jurisdiction. So you can't escape that kind of cost.
So do you see a situation where someone wants to use your platform to issue an asset and you tell him you can do that right now, or I have to send the contract and your details to some financial regulator first before I allow you to issue the asset?
So specifically in terms of our protocol, we can't prevent that, and we've designed it so we can't prevent it because we are not an intermediary to the protocol. We can stop tracking a certain asset using our servers, and that will be some inconvenience to an issuer, but no, we cannot prevent that with our protocol, and I think probably none of the other protocols around the table would be able to prevent that because by nature we are all decentralized. So we also have to protect ourselves to make sure that even though we're providing the tools to enable someone to do something illegally, that we're not going to be liable ourselves, and like I said, I've spoken to a lot more lawyers, I've got more lawyers to talk to make sure that we can protect ourselves adequately.
But again, if I can come back to the point of competition here, I think this is really critical in the question of regulation because, different jurisdictions will pick different regulations, but the major benefit, the major boon of this industry will go to whatever jurisdiction is friendliest. And you've got, the essential, competition and experimentation in different jurisdictions. In Texas, they've said, the Banking Commission has come out and said, well, as long as you're complying with the federal level and you're not a custodian of the funds, you can pretty much experiment with all of these blockchain, Bitcoin-related technologies that you want. Whereas in New York, at least based on what's been proposed, it's been much more onerous. So I'm very glad I picked Austin to live in 2 years ago, way before any of that knowledge was present. But I lucked out there because I thought about New York too. But Austin, Texas. So, but that's sort of the reality of this industry is people are going to block different jurisdictions if they don't allow for innovation. I mean, people are basically building a ring fence around New York right now. And New York will literally be left in the financial dark ages. It's like banning computers in the early 80s. Well, New York's just not going to have computers. Okay, nobody can send computers to New York. The rest of us are going to keep using computers, but New York, no computers. So, I mean, that's not really sustainable, and I think that's actually kind of embarrassing for New York. But competition will work that out over time.
Okay, thanks, guys. So back again to the technology. I want to ask everyone who's using the Bitcoin blockchain, and specifically XCP, which I've had some experience with. When you trade assets on XCP, as opposed to, for example, Next platform, you have somewhat tedious process where you have to escrow your funds if you want to meet some ask or bid on the market. And then basically you have to stare at the screen for a while until you see whether or not your order was actually accepted. So what I want to know is whether you think that the Bitcoin blockchain can really accommodate such form of trading, and whether or not you have any solution to this where you can cut out this time.
Look, the main problem, let's be honest about it, is Bitcoin blockchain speed. And basically the time it takes a new block to be created, the confirmations. It's where it starts and where it ends. It's general for all projects based on Bitcoin. We considered several times to use external systems, but again, then you basically going back to decentralization, and then you get to rely on somebody else to provide you this information. I can tell you that we are looking into some interesting solutions which also rely on some kind of mining pool technology integration where you can basically accelerate the transaction speed. It's still not pretty much mature, so I cannot speak about this in more detail, but the problem is we're all aware. We really want to bring it to the speed where you will not have to stare into screen, where you will be able to make an order, and you will see instant or almost instant result reaction to it. This is a known issue, known limitation, and hopefully we will have better news in the next coming couple of months with that.
So this is a key technical difference between counterparty and mastercoin and color coins type protocols, because color coins rides on the transaction model of Bitcoin, where value sits in the output of a transaction rather than at a specific address. So one advantage of color coin type implementations is that you can create a transaction between two parties that directly performs the exchange and submit that transaction to the network. And within a few seconds, when that transaction is propagated on the network, you can be confident that that transaction will end up being confirmed, because no network node will accept another transaction that conflicts with that first one. So this is one way in which color coins protocols have an advantage. Counterparty and Mastercoin have other advantages, but this kind of connects to what I was saying before, where different protocols really have very important technical differences, and that leads to product differences that the market will decide about over time.
So in that particular case, I don't see any reason why Counterparty or Mastercoin, if they don't have it already, can't integrate a transaction type which requires two signatures and which cross-transfers assets between the two.
Okay, and I have a question for you, David. Well, Mastercoin, I think, was the first protocol to come alive, and the one that was most highly funded. I mean, compared to XCP and NXT, which, well, XCP was completely unfunded, and Next raised a few tens of Bitcoins. You had approximately 5,000 Bitcoins. And so you started first and with the highest vault. And right now, it seems to an objective observer that you are lagging behind. So I'd like to ask you whether you think that's the case, if Mastercoin has any sort of advantage or edge over the other protocols, and why you think at least that this perception exists that you're lagging behind.
I think part of the perception is a difference in technical approach. So I remember the early days. I was involved right at the beginning when JR first brought the crowd sale to the attention of the Bit Angels, is how I first heard about it, in August of last year. And he said, hey, I wanted to do smart properties on top of the blockchain. And I said, great, that's one of the biggest things that I want to see become a reality in the Bitcoin universe. So I got very excited about it and helped, really do a lot of due diligence on that project, wrote up a big report, shared it with a lot of other people that were considering participating in the crowd sale. And so, yeah, the crowd sale was real successful in the sense that it was like 4,700 something Bitcoin was collected. And that was back when Bitcoin was $100. So it was about $500,000 in pre-sales of the software. And they began building it out. And a lot of it was learning curve. So initially the approach was, okay, great, let's see what people, how they want to approach building this. And so it was sort of an open competition for people to build the software. And we ended up with 4 different implementations. Some people built web wallets, some people built clients, some people took different approaches. And it was a process of sort of, you always had to, get all those clients to build the next feature together. And what we realized over time is the advantages of having a core developer team that's really focused on a reference implementation. And over time, the field really narrowed from those 4 or 5 implementations to simply one core reference implementation and one web implementation. So that sort of take 3-4 months where that really, all that consolidation happened. And the second part of, I think, the perception is around testing. So some people in the community said, hey, we want to try these more advanced features. We want to try contracts for difference. We want to do gambling. We want to do all these advanced things that are in the specification, and we don't want to wait for crowd sales and token issuance and these other features. And so some people rushed ahead and said, okay, we're going to build those. And, you know, they built them, and they were the first to build those, but at the same time, they've run into issues where they've had to roll back features because those protocols were exploited, where people created contracts for difference, and somebody wrote a bot, and it stole every coin in all of the contracts for difference, right? And, you know, it's much more sort of a sandbox. Like, let's experiment with these cool advanced features. And that's cool. There's definitely a place for that. But when you're talking about moving tens of millions of dollars in assets, I'd rather focus on the protocol where I know they've done an extremely large amount of testing. There's an active test net. There's a lot of core developers. And so if you actually look at the value transferred and traded on the protocols, Mastercoin actually has a large piece of the value on the, mostly due to the MateSafe project, that is in the market today. And so it's not just number of projects, but it's the size and the scope of those projects. So it'll be interesting. There'll be good competition. I think competition is very healthy, but I think the narrative for the Master Protocol going forward is, look, we spent a lot of time really fleshing out the technical details. We feel very strongly that this is a very safe and you know, well-tested protocol. And so when I took over just a few months ago as the chairman, I'd just been a board member before, I basically doubled the foundation's efforts on testing and said, this is where I want to drive our stake into the ground and say, we're going to be the protocol that is tested and solid and ready for major implementations. And now we're being approached by projects that have hundreds of thousands and in some cases millions of existing users, and they're looking at the protocols and they're saying, well, I want the one that's most tested and most vetted. So I think we can change that narrative, and that's sort of my goal right now, is to change that narrative from, you know, okay, they've got this money, but, you know, are they producing the result? We've taken a lot of that power of those core developers and really doubled up on testing and all of that approach.
So if I were to summarize your answer, you would say that since you were the first movers and innovators and really took the time to experiment with the protocol and all of the users, and now you're the most battle-tested platform, and basically you paved the way for everyone else to learn from your well, successes and mistakes.
Sure, and you know, we took a lot of arrows, as they say, you know, the pioneers, you know, take the arrows, and we took a lot of arrows along the way, you know. People were concerned about certain technical approaches, like bloating the UXIO record, which we never, you know, wanted to do, but that was a big concern early on. And so it was moving to implementations of the protocol that didn't have those technical concerns. And so, like you were talking about earlier, there's been a shift in the community where there was a lot of negativity early on about, oh, this is going to destroy Bitcoin, or this isn't, quote unquote, a legitimate use of Bitcoin. But I don't think that's, you know, the right worldview. I mean, you'd have to believe in censorship and that there are good transactions and bad transactions in order to live in a world where you're going to blacklist certain types of Bitcoin transactions. So that's not the ethos I believe in, and I think that's become more embraced over time, is okay, using this as a ledger is a legitimate way, but let's find the best ways. I mean, that's why I'm so interested in what Paul's doing. Like, okay, let's solve the bloat problem as part of making these protocols realistic. I mean, there's not room to do 1 million transactions a day into the Bitcoin blockchain. There aren't, right? So, but if we build the solutions technologically, I think they can solve that problem. So I think we're actually pushing forward the bounds of Bitcoin technology in general.
Okay, thank you for that very comprehensive answer. So before we open up the panel for a question or two for the crowd, I have one last question for all of you. Feel free to jump in. What do you think would be the most interesting use case, the most interesting function of this technology that's not related to the finance world? Something that any user, someone who hasn't even perhaps heard of Bitcoin would like to use, would like to utilize this technology for?
So we're talking to someone doing something very interesting using our protocol. There's a problem in the wine industry where there's a lot of counterfeit wine that's being sold on. And so the idea would be to create a token that is transferred together with a bottle of wine from the wine producers to the agents to the eventual end user. Could actually be able to check the chain of custody, and just like in police cases, the chain of custody from the wine producer all the way to them to make sure that they're getting an authentic bottle of wine and not a fake bottle of wine. So that's a non-financial use.
Just to clarify, are semi-financial uses okay? So, for example, something like decentralized cloud storage. So I think there's a lot of possibilities in this sort of semi-financial space, because on the one hand, these are protocols that are really nice for exchanging currencies, for moving tokens around. But on the other hand, you have this whole cryptographic side that allows you to suddenly do a whole bunch more things provably in this decentralized way. So if you combine those two aspects, you can have these sort of marketplaces where basically anyone can earn a few cents an hour by renting out spare gigabytes on their hard drive. You can do things like decentralized mesh networking, and there's even opportunities for those kinds of protocols in the real world. Like I think if you create something like a decentralized version of Uber based off of self-driving cars, and where the cars themselves actually have smart property tokens on the blockchain that they're tied to. So when the car gets an unlocked message from a digital key, it actually checks on the blockchain. Was this message signed by whoever my current owner is? And if the person trying to unlock the car actually is the current owner of the car, actually according to the blockchain, then the car opens and it lets you drive you around for a while. And you could even make the contract on the blockchain more complex. You could have a car that automatically lets you send a transaction on the blockchain to rent the car out for 3 hours. So there's a lot of possibilities there.
I actually spoke last week with a company who looks to move carbon trading into blockchain. Carbon trading, if somebody knows, basically the way where the company have to pay something or buy something in exchange to producing carbon emissions in the air, in the ecosystem. And there is a whole trading system which basically where countries buy and sell eco credits for burning carbon in their factories. So there is an energy company who looks into Bitcoin blockchain, more notably into second-gen protocols, which I met last week, and which actually looking to utilize some of the smart property functionality to automate the carbon trading. So basically, country or big companies like factories in various industrial will be able to trade between themselves, and instead of using money, using its representation token of the carbon credit. This is quite an interesting solution.
I'd actually be so bold as to say the vast majority of Bitcoin transactions in the future will have nothing to do with money and nothing to do with finance. I mean, if this technology gets pulled into Internet of Things, it ends up as a record and as a means of recording things and as a token for every device on the internet, and a secure means of doing that, and as a system of record for that.
Two examples from NXT. One is a MMO RPG game that folks are developing. The token, the money of the game will be actually tied to NXT tokens, either directly or indirectly, I'm not sure. Another application is called NXT TY, which is kind of an encrypted WhatsApp, that all the messages are actually stored in the NXT blockchain.
Okay, and I'll just take this opportunity to mention the solution that I'm working on, the project I'm working on, Scenario, which is a completely decentralized and distributed social network based on attention economy principles, where users using smart contracts can actually pay each other for their time and attention. And this is something that I think has the chance, the option to really become widespread, even among those who know nothing about the technology. I'm sure there are many such solutions that are really going to change the world as we know it, at least the world online. So we have time for a question or two from the crowd. Would anyone like to ask anything? Yeah.
Well, you talked about financial assets, but I want to ask about physical assets. So let's say I have a house, which I don't, but let's say I do, and I want to sell it, and I want to sell it in a decentralized way. So it's not just a token, you know, there is a physical thing behind it. Thank you. And I want to, the guy I'm selling the house to, he needs to have a proof. So of course there is the blockchain that proves it, but there is also the bureaucracy. Will the state recognize it? And
So what you're asking basically is how can we get physical objects like your house on the blockchain?
So I've actually spent some time talking to people about this land registry problem. And so the thing is that, first of all, in developing countries, a lot of the time, like, there's no sort of title registry system at all. Land is just sort of owned by whoever happens to be residing in it. And you know, you get five boys to get into a house and throw the existing people out, then maybe you'll get away with it. But even in places like Canada, as it turns out, I was talking to a lawyer in Ontario, and apparently the way the land registry system works is that you have the whole thing's managed by a private company, and they give out basically private keys to the thing to lawyers that have a specific license. And what you actually have scams where people sign up for one of these keys under a fake ID, then they get the key, and then they use the key to transfer a few houses to themselves, and they get a mortgage under those houses, and then they disappear in the Bahamas with the money before everyone figures out what's going on. So it's putting an actual land registry onto a blockchain. It's something that could potentially have a lot of value. Like obviously it would actually require buy-in from a government in order to work. But so if it happens anywhere at all, it'll happen either in one of those private city experiments, or in China, or in Africa. Something that's not quite such an advanced economy. But there's lots of benefits. First of all, you can integrate leases and subleases. You could massive bureaucracy around that. You could actually build property taxes directly into the whole system. So making one kind of tax easier to evade, making another kind of tax easier to collect at the same time, kind of interesting. It's potential a lot of sort of unnecessary bureaucracy and even fraud could actually go away. But it does require a lot of buy-in from everyone in society at the same time.
Sure, but you've talked about...
That's all the time we have to finish, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
So thanks a lot, guys. I've enjoyed this a lot, and I know I feel smarter. I hope you do as well.